You see, coming up with an idea that parallels the evidence doesn't mean that it is correct. In science, even with evidence, it is sometimes difficult to form a conclusion that is good enough to stand up to scrutiny. Here we're not talking about science, we're talking about Genesis, and Genesis doesn't stand up to science. In other words, it doesn't parallel the Big Bang cosmology. I'm going to directly parallel the Genesis account where applicable to what we can provide evidence for in science. And I'm going to be tremendously gracious and use John's own timeline rather than a day in normal usage. Genesis tells us that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. We have no evidence for God. The earth wasn't created in the first 2.3 billion years. Genesis says, "And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day." There was no sun at this time to provide light for the day, nor an earth that could experience day or night. Genesis says, "And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, Let the earth bring forth grass, and herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good." According to John's timeline, this would have taken place 6.9 billion years after the Big Bang, that is, each day being 2.3 billion years in length, and this being the third day. So taking that timeline as accurate and applying it to Genesis, before the sun and the stars were created, there was grass and herb yielding seed and fruit trees. Genesis says, "And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also." As we've already established, the first stars were born when the universe was around 200 million years old, not, according to this timeline, 9.2 billion years. Genesis tells us, "And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the water brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful, and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the fifth day." John's timeline would make this 11.5 billion years from the Big Bang, or before 2.3 billion years ago, so we'll need to break this down with a checklist. Moving creatures that have life, check. The earliest life forms on Earth are thought to have been between 3.77 and 4.5 billion years ago. Fowl that fly above the Earth. Modern birds originated as early as 100 million years ago, but the first flying creatures were 230 million years ago. Even if we take it to mean that things that fly rather than fowl, or even birds, we're still well short of 2.3 billion years ago. Whales. The earliest ancestors of whales lived 50 million years ago, well outside the biblical figures. So other than moving creatures that have life, which we could interpret as the earliest life forms, Genesis is absolutely battered by the evidence using this time scale regarding the fifth day. When we get to the sixth day of the timeline, there's no difficulty with the Genesis passages using science to spotlight it. Everything else could conceivably have occurred within the last 2.3 billion years. Overall, however, using this timeline, Genesis really doesn't stand up to critical scientific scrutiny. at all. Let's go back to that all-important line of the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. Differences in data are ignored.